lot of shapeshifters out there, but there are none that are quite like Eyescream. Eyescream is a mutant whose abilities allow him to turn into ice cream. That's it. That's what he can do. He was once a villain who was jealous of the X-Men and sought to take them down because their powers were a lot cooler than his. He felt that the X-Men made him look bad, running around doing cool stuff with all their cool powers. Admittedly, I think I would agree with him. However, how he thought he was going to take down the entire X-Men team with powers that simply allowed him to turn into ice cream, I do not know. Needless to say, it did not go well for Eyescream in that endeavor. Is Eyescream the villain with the weirdest powers? Let me know other villains that you feel like have very bizarre, unexplainable powers. It's time to get into some of the weirdness that is the Great Lakes Avengers. Being that this isn't the mainstay Avengers team, they are about as strange and in some cases unimpressive as you'd expect. Doorman is one of the members of the Great Lakes Avengers. As lackluster as his name is, his power can sometimes be very useful, but the issue with it is that it's so specific. So finding the right and best way to utilize it can be challenging. Although to his credit, I'd like to say that Doorman does a pretty good job with how and when he uses his powers. Doorman's powers allow him to create in essence a doorway or a door between adjacent areas that are separated by a wall. So he's kind of like a moving portal, which can be useful in some cases and much less useful in others. Chamber is a weird character, but also a beloved character. Like many weirdos that I love to talk about, Chamber is also a mutant. His name is Jonathan Starsmore, and while he may actually have the potential to be considered Omega level, that doesn't make his powers any less weird, let's be real. His power relates to the fact that he is actually made of pure psionic energy. When his powers first manifested as a result, they blew a massive hole in his chest and his face, blowing off his jaw. While many people would be immensely harmed or even killed by such an occurrence, Chamber was not. Jono, as a result, no longer needed to breathe, eat, or drink, and his blood even did not need to course through his veins to keep him alive. As such, he is typically seen with a scarf or some other clothing covering the lower half of his face, and he communicated telepathically as his jaw was blown off when his powers first emerged. Zeitgeist is known for his weird power, which when it first manifested, scarred the face of a young woman he happened to be making out with at the same time. His power is that he can produce acidic vomit, which I'm not really sure how you could best utilize that if you were fighting in a battle, and it would definitely make for quite the hazard if you just had the flu and you were feeling, super unwell, super nauseous. Zeitgeist does wear a protective mouthpiece to help prevent any other dangerous cases from happening, which is good because Zeitgeist's acid vomit is powerful enough that it can actually burn through, get this, solid steel. He is somewhat more durable than your normal mortal human, which of course makes sense if you were someone who can vomit, that level of acid. You'd have to be fairly durable to even be able to do that, to even be able to make that acid and live. Axel Clooney is a mutant and used to be the leader of the X-Force at one point, but more recently led the rival team to Ecstatics known as the Excellent. I honestly love Broo, and now his powers are basically the coolest around, but for a while there he wasn't really the coolest per se. You see, Broo may be a mutant, but he's also part of the Brood, so his mutant superpower was actually nothing quite so exciting as some of the others that are out there. Broo's mutant power and mutation actually made him compassionate, which for a Brood is actually a superpower really, as Brood don't really feel compassion, empathy, or sympathy like humans do, but for an X-Men, well, it's a little less impressive. It should be noted though that even though it doesn't sound impressive for a Brood, compassion is, like I said, it's pretty amazing to have as an ability, as Brood are typically unable to feel this emotion at all. And currently, Broo is also king of the Brood, so hey, there's also that. Penance was once the hero known as Speedball, who is now back to being Speedball again actually, thank goodness. His real name is Robert Baldwin. Baldwin decided to change up his superhero appearance and name following the instigating event that led to the first superhero civil war. In the comics this was similar to but different from the Sokovia Accords that we saw in the MCU. Similar in the sense that many people died, many of them in the case of the comic civilians, different in the sense that it wasn't a tragedy at a political gathering, but rather happened as a result of the New Warriors pursuing supervillains in the interest of their reality TV show. One person, Nitro, went off, killing a bunch of civilians and the rest of his teammates in the process, with Speedball being one of the few people to survive the incident. As a result, it was said that his powers had changed due to his guilt, and they could only be activated when he experienced physical pain. This caused Robert Baldwin to change his name and his appearance, being known as Penance, in honor of all the lives lost that he felt responsible for, and wearing an Iron Maiden inspired supersuit covered in spikes, inward spikes, as many spikes as there were casualties, so that he could trigger his powers as needed. Not all mutants get to be as badass as folks like Vulcan or Storm. Case in point, Beak. Although Beak as a character is admittedly pretty cool and pretty brave, his mutant power is more of a physical mutation, which means that he is evidently not considered a favorite for many X-Men fans out there. Beak's powers, if you can call them that, leave him resembling a bird and also make him built like one, but initially in the comics he couldn't even fly. Beak has since figured out how to fly, or rather glide somewhat, but even still he can really only go very short distances, and even going short distances he doesn't really have a ton of tactical flying skills to speak of either. He's no angel, you know? Fortunately though, Beak is still a really likable person and character, so he doesn't often need to rely on his mutant powers to be of use. Big Bertha. Oh boy. So Big Bertha can basically transform her body, adding mass, weight, and height as needed, and even controlling where the added mass goes specifically in regards to her figure and the added weight's distribution, which doesn't sound too bad on paper, right? But then the other part of it is that Big Bertha is actually Ashley Crawford, who was originally known for being a thin, tall runway supermodel. Ashley of course can transform from bigger to smaller as well, but to do so she actually has to vomit. I think you can see how this is pretty problematic, to put it lightly. More recently in the comics, Marvel tried to redeem the character and her power set, but needless to say, it's likely for this very reason that we haven't really seen Bertha around in the comics for some time. Tag is definitely one of the weirdest superheroes out there when it comes to his abilities. He is Brian Cruz, a mutant whose powers allow him to tag someone psionically, inciting a telepathic urge to either run away or run towards someone. Yeah, he's basically the game Tag incarnate. He could use his powers to tag multiple people, but if making them emit a psionic signal that encouraged others to run away from them, the range would actually top out at about 100 meters away. Then the urge for people to run away would just simply stop, so it's also got weird restrictions, to be honest. I mean, I guess you gotta have restrictions somewhere, right? Fantomex has to be one of the weirdest characters in all of Marvel Comics. He has a lot of powers that are strange, but one of the strangest is that his nervous system can turn into a flying ship. Yeah, it can turn into a flying ship. His nervous system also has a name and also even has pronouns. She is known as Eva, which is technically an acronym. Eva can separate herself from Fantomex and turn into a ship controlling herself, so she can fly herself around. And Fantomex can also sometimes control Eva, but it requires a lot of focus for him to do that. At first, she's not sentient, but can become a separate entity still, but as time goes on, she evolves and she changes. And even at one point when Phantom X seemingly dies, she herself turns into a humanoid being and does end up developing sentience. Eva also seems to have a symbiotic connection to Phantom X in the sense that if she is hurt, Phantom X can typically feel it. However, while she is separate from Phantom X, this means that he doesn't actually have a nervous system himself. All in all, Eva seems to be one of the weirdest powers, one of the weirdest things that I've just ever heard of. Not just within Marvel, but within maybe all of comics. Definitely up there for me. That's about it. I'm your host Amanda McKnight. Until next time, you stay nerdy, YouTube. Bye!